Welcome back. 34 minutes past the hour. It is the Jeff Santos Show. 772-925-8206. Phone number to join us. And, of course, it's 4:30 in the East, 1:30 in the Pacific Northwest. And that's not the right one, Ron. And we have the wrong intro. That's the one for 5 o'clock. This is the 4:30 intro. Oh, yes, indeed. He's a singer. He's a guitar player. He is the man on Twitter every day. Jeff Santos Show. At Jeff Santos Show. You can check him out on that Twitter site. Mark Taylor-Canfield, of course, is his name. You see him in Daily Kos. You hear him here on the Jeff Santos Show every Tuesday at 4:30. He is the man with a plan from Seattle, Washington. Happy Tuesday, Mark.
Hey, Jeff. I have some new music for you. I have a new CD coming out. Mark Taylor-Canfield, MTC and the Revel Saints. That's all Revel right. As in there's a famous resort in France called Revel, where a lot of rock stars hang out and cause a lot of trouble. So I'll get you some of that new music. But you know what? There's a great band playing in Seattle on October 28th, on the 28th at Neptune Theater, the Sonics. They are great. They're
late 1960s, 70s?
Band.
Yeah. I know about them.
Those guys, they must be in their 60s by now, but they rock, and people love them. So I will definitely be there. And anybody in Seattle who's listening, check out the Sonics at the Neptune on October 28th, because they are one of the actual influences on the grunge scene, believe it or not, because a lot of my friends told me that when they first moved to Seattle, they were listening to a lot of 60s garage rock bands. And the Sonics are actually originally from Tacoma, so just south of Seattle, but they're legendary. And
that's awesome. I remember talking, hearing Dave Grohl talk about, how Nirvana got started and the influence that the Sonics had on Cobain and company. So it makes a lot of sense. And the congressional candidate, a lot of people still following Bernie in the Seattle metro area, and they were also booing Hillary Clinton at the same time at this event, too. Talk to me about that.
Well, before I talk about that, I should mention I do have a new article at Oximity.com. It's a great global news website with over 75 million viewers, so I suggest people check that out. And that's about the World Food Prize, which is an event that took place in Des Moines last week. And we had some reporters there from Democracy Watch News, where I'm a contributing editor. And unfortunately, they weren't treated very well. So if you want to read about that, you can check out my article there. And also, the Des Moines Register covered what happened with our reporters. So story for another time. But here in Seattle, Bernie Sanders was here just a couple of days ago. 1,500 people packed the Showbox Theater, which is probably the premier venue for rock bands in Seattle, if they're not playing the Coliseum or something. So, but it's the best place to see music in town. I mean, you can get right up front and see your favorite rock star, 5 feet away. It's awesome. And she was actually in town to support Pramila Jayapal, who is our candidate for the congressional district number 7. And she is an amazing, and she calls herself a bold progressive fighter. And it's true. Ever since I've known her, Jeff, when I met her years ago, when I first started visiting Seattle, she was the woman on the bullhorn, on the megaphone at the protests, and very outspoken and loud. And I never thought that she would get involved with mainstream politics. But here she is, running for Jim McDermott's office since he's retired after 14 terms. And as popular as she is, Jeff, yeah, it's a safe progressive seat. It represents the city of Seattle. So Pramila is very popular around here. And if if her popularity increases or even stays the same, she may be in that seat for a long time to come, Jeff. So look for good things from her. You know, she won't have the seniority, of course, that McDermott had, but she's definitely got the fighting spirit, and I think she'll get some national recognition for being so outspoken on a lot of really important progressive issues, and also being an Indian American with a South Asian background. She brings immigration rights right to the top of her list of priorities. When I first met her, she was speaking at an immigration rights protest at the INS Center here in Seattle. So she's really strong on that issue. She's really strong in the environment and all sorts of progressive social issues. So she was out there saying that we really need to concentrate on democracy over greed. You know, so that's part of her issue, is just getting rid of Citizens United, opening up the political process. She also really pushed the idea that people in the audience should run for office themselves. So she's super popular here, and she got an amazing response from the crowd. But, of course, a lot of people were there because they wanted to see Bernie Sanders, and this has been the first chance that anybody in the Northwest has had a chance to see him since the convention. So it was really exciting, and they had predicted a huge storm. So the first thing he said when he got on stage was, you know, my wife said, "Don't go to Seattle, there's a huge storm." He's like, "I'm still looking for it." You know, it never happened. But there was a storm in the showbox where tons of people showed up. It was filled to capacity. And I think that most of the people in the crowd actually were not there necessarily representing the Democratic Party. It was a very wide coalition of progressives, Greens and alternative socialists, and you name it. The Democratic Party actually, I don't think, even came up by name during this rally. Also, Noel Frame spoke there, who's a candidate for our state legislature, and then
right.
Ron Sims.
Who I got to meet in Philadelphia. Very nice. Yes.
And Ron Sims gave a great speech, too. He's retired from politics now after being, you know, in the Obama administration, but he is really out there kicking butt for progressives right now. So, you know, it was an amazing event. And, yes, you were right when it came to the issue of Hillary Clinton, because this was a campaign rally for Pramila Jayapal, and she is way ahead in the polls, so it does look like she'll be a new member of Congress. But the issue of Hillary Clinton did come up, both when Bernie Sanders spoke and when Pramila Jayapal spoke, and yes, there were boos from the crowd. And as I told you off the air, you know, it didn't seem to surprise either Bernie Sanders or Pramila Jayapal. I mean, they knew the kind of crowd that they were speaking to, very fiercely independent progressives in Seattle who just won't back down. So they took it in stride. They were not offended or they didn't get defensive about it, which is what the mistake that a lot of more conservative Democrats do these days. But she directly to it and said, "Hey, I know I was one of the first, you know, people in the country to stand up and publicly endorse Bernie Sanders," which she was, long before any Democrat in Washington State had endorsed Bernie Sanders. She and also our Alternative Socialist Party member, Shama Sawant, the city council member in Seattle, they both endorsed Bernie Sanders. So I gave them a lot of credit for being so courageous in the very beginning and standing out there in front and standing up for their principles. And I find that actually they do have a pretty close relationship, these two women, and also share a similar heritage. So they've worked together on issues like the $15 an hour minimum wage. And another thing that people should know is that
I just want to interrupt you for a second, Mark. Ron, if you can, there is a audio segment on, so if you could shut that down for me, it'd be really great. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Mark. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
Well, Bernie Sanders got an ear-shaking, I don't know how to describe it. It was like a rock concert. I mean, I literally wish I had earplugs at one moment because the crowd was so loud when he took the stage. And obviously, Pramila was very excited to see him there. He has been very supportive of her, and he is doing these rare down-ticket events, and this is one where, you know, he stepped right up to support Pramila Jayapal and called her a very innovative leader and the future of, you know, politics in the United States as part of his sort of Our Revolution movement. And that is kind of how it felt. Like I said, it didn't feel like a Democratic Party event. It felt like more like an Our Revolution event, or even more independent than that, just a wide coalition of folks who were really affected by the Bernie Sanders campaign, There was a big contingent of Native Americans there that got a lot of attention with their chanting and signs, and Bernie acknowledged them as sort of Premier. The Lamai Nation and many other tribes were there represented. So there's always a sign that, I've used in several of my articles that says Natives for Bernie, and that's a group of Native Americans in the Seattle area who just love the guy. So he spoke a lot about what happened with the Dakota Access Pipeline and the Standing Rock Reservation protests and how important it is to work with Native Americans. And, another thing I should say is that they both accused Donald Trump of being a misogynist and a racist. They did not hold back at all on that. And that was Premier's justification for voting for Hillary Clinton, or at least supporting her. In her mind was that, we don't want this guy anywhere near the White House, after she acknowledged that she was a Bernie Sanders supporter. But there's a lot of love between the two. You can tell that, they're in the same movement, and they're trying to move the progressive campaigns ahead in this country, whether it's Premier Jayapal in the Northwest or Bernie Sanders in Vermont, or, wherever it happens across the country. I think people are starting to come together and realize that there's a void in the political spectrum that needs to be filled. And these people in Seattle are definitely going to step up to bat, to use a sporting phrase, but they are definitely ready for something new, and they're not backing down. And yes, many of them will vote for Hillary Clinton, but that's not enough. They really are looking for more honest, authentic, truth-telling candidates. And I think, Jeff, that's the most important thing. Well, in the media and in politics, that is the most important thing we need right now in this country, is just people who are willing to take an authentic stand like yourself and just tell the truth as they see it, and not worry about, where the political winds are blowing. Because Shama Sawant and Premier Jayapal have shown that in the Northwest, at least, if you're an authentic progressive fighter for progressive causes, then there will be coalitions of people, including small business and labor unions and, socialists and Democrats, Green Party people who will get behind you and protect your seat. So I think Premier Jayapal is going to be one of the best U.S. Congress members ever. I really do.
You are a big advocate, and you've been saying that quite a bit. We're talking to Mark Taylor-Canfield here on the Jeff Santos Show. Phone number to join us, 772-925-8206, and we'll get to John in a second from our great city of Minneapolis. Let me ask you this. Do you think that the folks that are Bernie Sanders supporters, those who booed Hillary Clinton, are going to show up and not only vote for Hillary Clinton, but are going to vote for the state Senate, for the state House, because, of course, that's a big concern, particularly on the education issue, that you need to get a certain, I don't know if it's 3/4 or whatever the numbers are there in Washington State to get some education dollars. But what are people doing down ballot? I just had a whole commentary on that. We got to look not only beyond November, but to what's happening in 2018. Because, majority of governors are selected in 2018. I think there's a couple this year. Are you guys up this year for governor's race as well, Mark?
Yes.
So, Inslee should win pretty easily, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And here's the situation here is that the traditional incumbent Democrats did quite well in the primaries and are going to do really well in the general election. And also some of the progressive stalwarts, like our state representative Bob Hasagawa, who's been pushing for a state bank for as many years as he's been in the state legislature. He's also a former labor leader. Well, he won quite big in the primaries. Noel Frame did great in the primary, taking over one of the seats there. So what surprised me, though, is that a lot of the Bernie-crats who just stepped onto the scene recently didn't do as well as I had hoped, including, my friend Wes Irwin, who was running for superintendent of public instruction, who's a teacher, because there are a lot of other reforms that need to happen in Washington State, and unfortunately, I'm not sure that electing those people is going to solve that situation. Can you hear me, Jeff?
I can indeed. You're coming through.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think
clearly.
I was getting a call on the other line. I apologize for that.
No worries.
My editor for Democracy Watch News.
772-925-8206. Let's go to the phones and talk to John in Minneapolis. John, you're next with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. How you doing, man?
Oh, just fine, just fine. Yeah, I think that, progressives need to consolidate their power, and, we do need to seek people outside the party that have done, tremendous things. This movement with the American Indians, is absolutely wonderful as far as I'm concerned. And, Ralph Nader pointed out in a book that he wrote about, the bringing together of often very different kinds of people under one movement, and I think that that's possible. And putting this pipeline through has brought together landowners, American Indians, people who own ranches, environmentalists, and other people. Also, in Canada, Black Lives Matter is very much supportive of Idle No More, which is a Canadian Indian organization. And when that has happened, we've made a lot of progressive change. Like, for instance, I would say the Roosevelt administration, and also under the Johnson administration, you had people that really ran, the whole gamut. Unfortunately, there are people within the Democratic Party that don't want to recognize that and want to exclude these people. I mean, even Bill Press, I remember when he was talking about, this was about a year ago, talking about the $15 an hour movement, never mentioning Kshama Sawant as really being the person that spearheaded it. I mean, when we talk about democracy, the more people involved, I mean, you don't have to agree with everything that Socialist Alternative proposes, but $15 an hour was a pretty darn good thing. And why, it didn't come from the Democratic Party. Well, we know why it didn't come from the Democratic Party. So, I think that solidarity, building solidarity on the other end, and Bernie, I've been to Bernie rallies. They are like, it's like a rock star.
Yeah.
You're like, it's a little bit disappointing in a sense, but the energy from all the people in the audience is really wonderful. I hadn't seen anything like that really in my life when it comes to politics. So we need to keep that momentum going and change the party. Like
I know, I agree with you 100%. Let me ask you this, Mark: Do any of the folks in Washington State, whether it's members of Congress or Noel, do they look at all to forming coalitions, not only with other Democrats in the great state of Washington, but also in Oregon and California, and putting together a progressive group, a coalition of sorts, that can spread the message that John is talking about? Because to me, it's going to come from the Pacific Northwest or Northern California. That's the most progressive part of the country. There's no debate, in my opinion. Bernie has as much said it himself. Mark, do you see that at all? Or are they just going to stay in their own corner?
Well, by the way, our caller just described the future of U.S. politics, as far as I can tell, which is coalition politics.
Yeah.
And it involves support for candidates based on issues rather than political parties. And so I would look at it this way: a two-pronged strategy is that you support some Democratic Party candidates who deserve your support because of their progressive background, and then maybe at other times you might want to oppose some of the more corporatist Democrats and run Bernie-crats, to challenge that. But as far as what the organizing goes in the Northwest, it's done on a statewide basis, just like most of the rest of the country, Jeff. It's really, Washington does its own thing, British Columbia does its own thing, California does its own thing. There's a lot of travel in between and a lot of, sharing media and things like that. But in reality, things like legalization of marijuana, Washington State ran Initiative 502, which passed. And then, it was, 2-3 years later when Oregon did the same thing. So we don't always work together on the same platform at the same time because there are different constituencies and different balances of representation in our state governments. So you see what I'm saying? So people tend to organize on a statewide basis, and that's how the elections are run too. So of course people are going to focus on that. But there is, a similarity in platforms, and I think that we all look at each other. Folks in Humboldt County and folks in Seattle and folks in Portland and Vancouver kind of watch each other to see how the other states are pushing these initiatives ahead. And I think recently they have